is different based on the teams that you have and like the size of the teams. I would say over communicating when you're in remote is probably one of the best things that you can do. And if it's too much, your team will tell you when you can adapt. But under communicating and not understanding which team member is not doing well or have a greater workload than they can manage or have personal problems because you don't see them on a day-to-day or you only see them on a group call. I think that's the first thing that you should start doing, and having safe spaces for people to tell you if there's something happening in their lives. I think one-on-ones, for example, with your team on a very regular schedule is super important, and even more important in remote because they can't just ask you in a simple way, something that might be bothering them.
Hey everybody, welcome to Leading from Afar, a podcast by remote leaders for remote leaders, aimed at sharing knowledge and experience to help make remote awesome within your companies. I'm Scott Markovitz. I was the first hire at Envision and helped build the foundations of the company, from marketing, sales, product, operations, and pretty much everything between. I've also mentored and consulted with hundreds of early stage startups, including a bunch of remote ones. Each episode, we'll speak about hot topics, trends, and the future of remote work. We'll also interview some super smart leaders at all levels of remote teams and introduce you to new tools that can help you succeed as a remote leader. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into another episode of Leading from Afar. As always, I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. Over the next few episodes, I'm looking to do a deep dive into a trend that I'm seeing more and more of. Team leaders who fully believe in remote work and want to embrace all the best practices that future of work has to offer. However, their companies just aren't there yet. So over these episodes, I hope to bring forth some easy wins and things that every leader can start doing today to enable the best practices within their specific teams. Today, I'm joined by Tania Kefs, the CEO and co-founder of Jurnee. Think of Jurnee as an Airbnb for team building and fun events. Like many other remote founders I've met the last 3 years, Tania is building a remote organization out of Paris. In this episode, we talk about Tania's experience as hire number one at Aircall and how she helped build a company and a culture with employees that rarely saw each other between Paris and New York. We talked about how the idea of Jurnee was born out of the experience of having to regularly create and organize team engagements. And then we dove right into what every leader can start doing today to practice the best of what the future of work has to offer. Hey, Tania, how are you today?
Hi, Scott. Good. How are you?
Good. How's everything in Paris?
Everything good. The weather is not as great as we would hope, but let's hope in the next few days it gets better. What about you?
Summer's coming along, so hopefully the weather gets better. Here it's sunny and hot now every day for the next probably 4 or 5 months. And besides that, all is well. Very busy week, which is good, and happy to end the week this week with a great conversation and hearing a little bit more about you and your journey and Jurnee's journey and things like that, which is exciting. And some of the episodes I like to start off with a non-topical question, and I think probably this one is pretty easy. It was obviously in the news this week of Elon Musk saying remote is finished at Tesla and SpaceX. If you're working for me, you're coming back to the office, working at least 40 hours a week in the office. You have obviously lots of both sides. All of us remote people are like, that's just ludicrous. I mean, yes, if you're physically building a rocket or you're physically building a car, then obviously you can't do that remotely. But for those other roles where you aren't required there, it just doesn't make sense to you. But would love to kind of hear your thoughts of what you think about that. And, is this going to be a great opportunity for remote companies to now steal a lot of the fantastic talent at SpaceX and Tesla?
Yeah, maybe. You'll be able to get like amazing talent. Like we've seen that with other companies like Apple, for example. Yeah. I also think that people that work at SpaceX and other companies from Elon Musk are very specific and they kind of like know who they're working for. I don't think that's representative of like what's going on in the world. And it's like one example. So of course the CEO is very famous and everybody knows him. So everybody talks about it. I don't think that's the reality of like what people are living right now.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing with that idea of, being able to access talent from Apple or Tesla or SpaceX. And pre-pandemic, and I'll ask this maybe as a secondary question, pre-pandemic, probably maybe even like 6 months before the pandemic started, I started seeing a lot of remote companies popping up. I started meeting the founders, a conversation here, that were either coming out of Paris or Berlin. And I was amazed, like one after the other, like Paris, Berlin, Berlin. So I started, reaching out to founders and having conversations. And the answer was always the same, consistent. Here in Paris, here in Berlin, we have X amount of great developers, UI designers, marketers, so on and so forth. We're not curing cancer. We're not getting people to Mars, maybe outside of SpaceX. So we know that we can't compete against the Googles and the Facebooks and things like that. So we know from day one that we have to be remote first. It's interesting now, again, with the trouble at Apple, with the trouble at Tesla, like, is this now the big opportunity for small startups in Paris or Berlin or wherever they are? Like, now, okay, great, you want to get remote, but now you have access to these top talent people that you couldn't get before, because as you can see at Apple, like top executives and people are like, I'm not coming back into the office. And now you have an access to a super talented pool that you never had before. I'm interested in the kind of your thoughts around that and what movement there may be with that.
Oh, yes, 100%, even 1,000%. I could not agree more. I mean, I witnessed it personally when I was working at Urkel, which was my previous company. And it was super hard to hire. It was super hard to hire in Paris, but it was also super hard to hire in New York, where we had an office, and the competition is so high that it's, almost impossible to get the people that you want and the level that you want. And witnessing it with Jurnee at the moment, I mean, I would say like 90% of the people that were able to recruit said that being remote was a key decision for them to come with us, and something that their employer refused to give them. So it's like not even a question, like 100% that's going to change the game for a lot of companies.
Yeah, for sure. And we may actually dive into that question. It seems that these days, like, I want to almost now remote is no longer kind of like that carrot that you can dangle and saying, okay, yes, I'm going to take the job because I can work remotely, because again, it's becoming a standard. And what companies are now looking at beyond that, like 4-day work weeks and benefits and other things like that. But we'll kind of hopefully get into that later. But usually the way we start is introducing yourself a little bit more and telling us a little about the Jurnee's journey.
Sure. So the idea for Jurnee came from my experience at the previous company I mentioned, which is Urkel. I was their first employee. I started with only the founders, from the ground up as a generalist, and then moving on into customer success, building the team in Paris, and then in New York, being a VP and part of the leadership. So that was really interesting to see, okay, how do you build a company? What is hypergrowth? How do you find product market fit? What is governance? What is investors? So like a really crash course into entrepreneurship and building a company. And the thing that came out the most was, how do you manage people? How do you keep them motivated? And how do you keep them aligned towards the same goal? That's the most valuable thing that you can have as an organization, is your people, so recruiting, hiring, but how do they work together? And that was the hardest. And especially with distance between Paris and New York, the offices, like, it was not always easy for them to communicate and have the same level of information or involvement. And I think that was just like the beginning. And now with the pandemic and like the generalization of remote work and how it has become way more mainstream, it is a problem that a lot of companies are facing, and it's not niche anymore. And that's why with Jurnee, we wanted to give them tools to help them navigate this and be more intentional. And that's why we created a global platform, so that you can book events very seamlessly. Because for us, the answer that we had is that if you're not in the same office, you need to find other ways to meet and to interact and have this human relation. So in the office, it's easy. You go to the coffee machine, you have a coffee, you talk about things. When you're remote and you do that over Zoom, it's not the same. You don't get the same relationship. You don't get the same feeling. But when you have events and like you have, areas that are dedicated for it, then people open up and they feel that they can connect, whether it's virtual events even or in-person events. And we wanted to have something that was, people that they knew how to use like tools like for everything, but they don't have tools for that. And it's super important and it's big budget. So that's why it mattered to us. And that was something that we wanted to use. And we've seen that companies like in many different countries started to, come on board and make the most of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's definitely a very much needed platform, as you said. We can't go into a kitchen and we can't go for beers after work. We can't have those just opportunities and so they need to be intentionally created, and companies need to say, hey, we need to have these intentions. And it's not just a Zoom coffee. It's not just a virtual happy hour or an all hands. You need to have fun that's designed specifically to get people engaged and things like that. And I've come across quite a few of these companies. We had Lee, the CEO of Confetti, a few episodes about this. And I think the biggest unlock, and I'll say the same thing to you, is how to make those events interactional. That's even a word.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you're doing like a chess course or a cooking course or a wine, like again, it's that same methodology of a meeting, right? You have one person, okay, this is how you move the wine around the cup like this, and you smell it and you taste it. And it's everyone just kind of sitting there on the video call in their own home with their wine or their food or cooking and things like that. And you miss that if it was like in the central office space, where if you're doing a cooking class and you could take dough and throw it at somebody, you could have like a food fight, or you can, like, you still miss those. And the big unlock is how you create that interaction within the meeting and then as a follow-up. But it's something super, super important. And, I would love to see, obviously, as the product goes along. The idea I had for this episode, and I think for the next few ones, is going to be focused on what I like to call the version 3 or the third type of remote company. So this is something I brought up in the last episode about the head of remote role. I see there's kind of 3 types of remote companies. You have your OG companies that have been doing this for a long time, like a Buffer, like a GitLab, like an Envision, those companies that have been doing this since day one, long before. Fantastic. You have the second group that kind of pivoted to remote during the pandemic, and they're the ones who are saying, yes, we believe in this, we're going 110% in, right? We're jumping in the deep end, async and 4-day work weeks and IRLs all the time, like, yes. And then you have the group number 3, which is those ones that pivoted during the pandemic because either they had to or they realized that's where the future is going. But they're not yet embracing like those best practices. They're not yet embracing writing is the standard, is async, of 4-day work weeks, of IRLs, of engagements, using Jurnee to build intentional opportunities for the team as a company once a month to do a fun thing, and as a team to do something like that. So I wanted to kind of focus these sets of conversations over the next couple of episodes on leaders who are very future focused, I'm all into remote, I'm all into doing the right thing, but you're working for an organization that not yet doing the same thing or not yet embracing the best practices. So how that remote leader who wants to do the best for their team can be successful, and kind of we'll dive into different areas of engagement, conversations, and feedback and things like that. But I think that's kind of in the direction that I wanted to go, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, I mean, probably the first question is, and the easiest one to start off is like, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges for those good leaders that are facing and they're working for these companies that are just kind of doing remote? And especially when it comes down to engagement or team happiness. So again, a company is maybe doing an all hands. They're not doing a company-wide fun. Maybe they're thinking about one IRL. They're not really doing much as a company. But as a leader, like, hey, I need to be doing more. So what do you think like the biggest challenges are for these specific leaders?
Sure. I mean, if your company is not behind you or helping you, I mean, you're kind of like on your own. So I think that's the first thing is like, okay, how do you get the info? And I think like finding peers in other companies definitely helps a lot. I mean, you can read a lot of things online and there's a lot of documentation and I mean, podcasts like this one, of course, but having someone that is doing it and understand, really interestingly what's happening and what are the challenges, like definitely helps a lot. That's true for any role. Like when you're jumping into a new role or doing something else that you haven't done before, I would definitely encourage them to talk to people that have, and if you can, that are doing it well. That definitely helps. And I think try and learn. One of the first things is to ask your team. Like they're the one that are directly, you're doing that for them. So what do they want? Do they want more engagement? Do they want more communication? Do they want more information, tools, async? So understanding what your team wants is like, I think the first step, because different teams are not going to want the same things. I mean, a sales team and an engineering team, I don't think are going to have the same rituals or processes, and that's fine. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think being very intentional about it and saying like, it's not just going to happen on its own. It's not, people are not going to have coffee over Zoom if you're not like having a tool or a system. They're not going to have like their daily stand up on Slack the same way that they would have in the office. So I think having the tools and rituals and then having like a try and learn, of course, method and assessing, okay, every month, what were the good rituals? What were the ones that are not like, making the cut, and then going from there.
I love that point, and I want to maybe dig in a little bit deeper to that. You said a couple of very, very important things. And number one, learning and upskilling, which is crucially important for any remote manager. And I mean, that's how this podcast started, January of last year. I thought to myself, hey, I've been doing this for, at that point, 8.5 years. Let me share, it's just, I want to say, a service to the community. Let me share what I've done, what worked, what didn't work, what I'm thinking about, bring on people like yourself who've also been doing it for a while and building tools to make it more successful, just to give the knowledge out there, because there isn't so much in the ways of upskilling remote managers or having, I mean, there's lots of stuff of, what tools to use or how to do, have the perfect desk set up or things like that, which, okay, I mean, that's, yes, I grant that's important, but those things that like a manager should and a leader should be thinking about and what they can be upskilling. So maybe to kind of like unpack that a little bit more of, how can remote leaders upskill and maybe to focus to maybe better see issues like burnout and maybe lack of engagement, and potentially what tools they can use. Because I think these are some of the biggest things, obviously, we've seen are in a remote environment when companies aren't doing this right. There's lack of engagement, especially during the pandemic. There is a lot of burnout that's happening. What can a leader do to upskill to be able to better see these things? And potentially what tools can they use to also better see these things?
Sure. I think, again, it's different, like based on the teams that you have and like the size of the teams and so on. But I would say over communicating when you're in remote is probably one of the best thing that you can do. And if it's too much, your team will tell you when you can adapt. But under communicating and not understanding which team member is not doing well or have a greater workload than they can, manage, or have like personal problems because you don't see them on a day-to-day or you only see them on a group call. I think that's the first thing that, you should start doing, and having safe spaces for people like to tell you if there's something, happening in their lives. I think one-on-ones, for example, with your team on a very regular, schedule is super important, and even more important in remote, because they can't just ask you in a simple way, something that might be bothering them. And then there's like a lot of small tools that have been developed that are also super helpful. I know there's like team mood and, a lot of polls that you can have like every day in Slack to understand like, okay, how is your team feeling? Why, what's their like morale and so on. And I think ultimately you also see it in the results. So if your team is not like, doing well, the results are not going to be great. So I think having a good barometer and understanding what the person wants or would be beneficial definitely helps. And I think that's also an opportunity. Like we always talk about remote and like how can we adapt, and it's hard, but it also gives us a lot of opportunity to say, we can be more inclusive, we can be more personalized and make sure that works for the people that we're working with.
Yeah. So I want to share what I do for my one-on-ones and tools we use, but maybe I'll let you speak first to share how your one-on-ones are formatted, and potentially again what those polls and things like what tools you use, like how are you looking at the information to then again get that bigger picture. So I'll let you go first.
Sure. I mean, like for us, for example, like we have like rituals and tools. So like every morning, like we have like a stand up because like we're in the same time zone. So it's fair. I would not say like every morning if we were in different time zones. And then we always have like a question that we ask for engagement. So this morning it was like, if we are an animal, like what would we be, for example? And you can kind of see if like how people like are into it, if, everything is going well, if not, or just want to get over with it. So I think that's one thing that has worked really well for us, or, or people offering, new questions every day. So it's like really simple things like that you can kind of like get a pulse of, okay, how is my team doing as a whole? And then we have one-on-ones weekly. I know some people do it bi-weekly, monthly. I think monthly is a bit too long, to be honest. I think weekly for us works because we're early stage. It goes super fast. There's so much information, that needs to be communicated. And then we try to structure it. Like one is about operational work. Okay, do you need help? Is there something that, is not clear? Do you want to let us know about something that is, a warning on, accounts or sales or, or tech, like we're going to finish a project in time or whatever. I think there's one part more about like projects, like how are you feeling? Do you feel like you're, working on things that like you like, and how can you be like, learning new skills? And I think there's a third part that is more about, okay, how are you feeling in your career as a whole? Do you feel that the short-term, objective that you do like ties into the long-term goals that you have? And how do we make sure that we can adapt? If something comes up at 2 or 3 one-on-ones, you're like, okay, maybe it's time to reassess and see how we can make a change.
I like that. So I'll go into my daily routine. So we also do a daily stand-up through Slack using a tool, Stand-Uply. I've tried so many. We were using Friday, but unfortunately they had to close. So I was quite disappointed with that. I had Luke last season. So one of the things I get for that daily stand-up is usually like their standard like daily stand-up, like what are you working on today? What's your biggest note? So on and so forth. But there's one question at the end, which is like an emoji face, like how are you feeling today? And that's something that I use as a barometer, and I always reinforce to my team, like always be honest. Like if you're having a crappy day, like if you didn't sleep or whatever the scenario is, like put a sad face. Like I want you to put a sad face because it's the flag for me. Like I very religiously look at that every day from everyone on my team. And if I see a sad face, that means like, hey, I need to reach out to this person now just to kind of see what's going on. Or if they put kind of like a neutral face for like three or 4 days in a row, that's like, for me, it's another flag of, okay, like they're just okay for a few days. Like what's going on? And it makes me take that intentional opportunity to reach out to them and kind of see what's going on. For the one-on-ones, I do them bi-weekly, and I do kind of a split. The work portion I do asynchronously. So I'll create a Google slide, either going through like their data points, and depending on my team, they may share something with me ahead of time as well. I'll kind of, again, go through that Google slide over a video. I'll send it to them on a Monday. You can say, you have 2 days to listen to this, watch this, just read the document, ask any questions. So any kind of questions, feedback, it can be done asynchronously. And then on Wednesday, we have a synchronous time that's set up for more, we call it relationship building, where it's just kind of having conversations, how's everything going. They also get a stand-up-ly bi-weekly, which asks them more of those kind of big questions of, are you enjoying what you're doing? Is this aligning with your goals? Where do you want to be going? What training could you be doing? Because also that Wednesday is very focused on personal development. So everyone on my team has 30 minutes every day logged in their calendar for personal development time, where they could do courses, training, whatever, for their kind of long-term kind of career. And very much focused of, okay, are you able to do that? Are you able to take the time? Like, how can I help you? How can I help you reach the goals that you want to reach? But I definitely find that, again, I'm not a fan of meetings at all, but the synchronous meetings, again, I've sat in too many of those where somebody reads like word for word through like the presentation. You're like, God, why couldn't you just send this to me? Like I would have read it and sent you questions. So I myself just try to say, hey, listen to it on your own time and your own speed. And again, let's take this time, this face-to-face time for relationship building. At least for me, I feel that, again, that's the more valuable time and more valuable impact of spending that time together. But I like to kind of hear, quite in line. Kind of the next question, you kind of touched on it with like the one-on-ones. So, how often and like what do you feel is the best format for leaders to build deeper connections with their team?
Sure. I really like that question because I think for the others, like it's more like, you have to ask your team, you have to see. But for this one, I feel like I have like a more straightforward answer that almost anyone can, apply. I think there's like different things that like you can do, and it's like not the same involvement or the same resources that you should apply. But I think once a quarter, I'm going to start with the like longest, there should be something important that is being organized. It should be the end of the quarter. It should be a celebration. It should be, or something to remotivate your teams, but it should be something that, sets things a bit apart, that takes people out of their work, out of their day to day, because you need that element of newness. Yeah. I don't know if that's a word, but you need to have that once a quarter. Otherwise you get bored. It's routine. It's day to day. So I think this is like where leaders should invest. I mean, of course, I'm biased because like that's also like what we do with Jurnee, but like we've noticed that this was super important, and that's like why we wanted to answer that pain. I think in addition to that, and especially if you're remote, you need also smaller engagement as a team, probably on a monthly basis. And there's like a lot of tools that you can do, a lot of games that are free or very cheap. Like we did Scribble, for example, like for us, like it's super fun. You can like set it up, like it's, half an hour or an hour, but just like you chill, you laugh, and you need that at least once a month. I feel like that's the very minimum. If you can do it twice a month, that's better, but not every team has the time. And then you probably need something on a weekly, even daily basis if you can. That's like very light, very small, that we mentioned. A poll on like how are you feeling, one-on-one, a question that you can ask your team. And you should be super diligent in those rituals because people need that structure. And I think that it's super important in remote because you can't just say like in the office, like, okay, the team is feeling low, like we'll go to a restaurant, No, that's not how it happens. Like you need to like have everybody scheduled. You need to understand what you can do, and people like want to be prepared. They want to know in advance what's going on, and you can like make them involved. And I think that's like super important. That's the opportunity of remote work. So you can ask them, okay, what do you want to do? What's the engagement that would, work? Does someone want to take the lead on that? And actually, like it in between the engagements, like there is also engagement, and that's the beauty of it. So it's like continuous. And I think that's like the secret of having a team that, fits well and have good relationships.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. As a company, once a quarter has to do something, again, fun. Yes, maybe linked to a quarter end or a quarter start. So again, there's a little bit of work fixed in there, but again, much more of it's, focus on the team building, which I have those conversations around IRLs, when the company actually gets together, whether it's once a year, twice a year, how often it is, like there's almost no work that should be done. I mean, the fact that these people don't see each other, they come together once a year, build like that's just hangout time, have fun time, like organizing. There has to be organized stuff, but it's very focused, not on work. But I love the idea of the quarterly for the team. I love the idea and the more often for the smaller team versus the company. With my team, I do every other week. I combine my two teams and we do a fun. So we play a game, we do a show and tell, we do something, and I also use that idea that you've mentioned about ownership. So I kicked off the first one or first two, and I said, okay, I want everyone else to own this. So every other time, someone else owns the idea of what we're going to do. Again, to give them ownership, to make sure like they feel their voice is being heard and they get to do the things that they're interested in. It's also be able to share things that they're interested in and allow their team to get to know them better and what types of things that they're interested in. And I personally check in with everyone on my team at least once, probably more twice a week, even just like through a kind of like a Slack message, just, hey, how's it going? How's your day? How's this, that, and the other? But it was interesting this past week in one of my one-on-ones that came through like the stand-up feedback, which I'm glad to see that people are transparent, and it makes me happy to see that. And that one of the people on my team had mentioned that she felt like it sometimes may be a little bit too asynchronous. And asynchronous is new to everybody in the team. No one's ever experienced it. So I was very much from like day one, like, this is what we're doing. So kind of get used to it. You're going to love it. And we had last week or the week before, we had our team kind of fun, and two of the people were out, which is like a third of the team, combined team. So I said, no, we're going to cancel this week because like a third of the team isn't there. We're going to go for the next week. And in the feedback she gave is like, no, I was disappointed that we missed out on the team kind of coming together, having a good time, spending that time together. And I said, damn, you know what? You're right. And like, you're absolutely right. I said, okay, no, never again am I going to make that mistake. Like, if people aren't there. Like, the team fun is going to continue for whoever's there. And they shouldn't be penalized of losing. Like, I felt on the other side, like, oh, I don't want to penalize the people for missing out on the fun who aren't there. But I penalized more the people who were there. So I said, not again. And I thought, okay, that was a great one thing. That's like once every 2 weeks. We need to do something more frequently. So I kind of threw a message into the team channel. I'm like, okay, what other ideas? What could we be doing? Maybe like an hour co-working session, or like a coffee thing once a week, or just looking for those opportunities to at least do, again, like you said, once a week. So at least once a week, everyone's together on a call, talking about whatever. So it could be about work, it could not be about work. But again, those opportunities are so important to get everyone together. So I absolutely loved what you said. For kind of bringing in, again, diving in that idea of I think microculture. So again, the leader who's within an organization that isn't, again, embracing everything. What do you feel what can good leaders do to create and foster that microculture within their team? So I think we've spoken about like best practices like a remote organization could do as a whole. But for like the specific team, again, who they don't have the same support maybe internally, like what could they do to kind of better foster that microculture within their team? And potentially, how do they kind of expand that out to other teams?
Sure. I think it's really hard, like for managers in remote, especially if they don't have the resources. I mean, it's hard if you do have the resources. So if you don't, like, if it's even harder. I think it's really about what is your team culture? Because you're like within a big organization, you're going to have microcultures, as you say. So understanding yours, what's important to them. And there are things that are universal, like people, they want a deep connection. They want to feel heard. They want to feel motivated. So this is things that like you can take kind of like as granted and say like, if we're not doing that well, there's a problem. And then there's things that are going to be very specific to your team in terms of like the way that they want to interact. Some people are going to say, we want more synchronous. And some people are going to say, well, we want more asynchronous because actually I do my best work at night and, or something like that, or I'm traveling and I still want to be involved. And this is going to be very different. So I think it's really about the rituals and making sure that those rituals like are being adapted, are being, taught, and that you can have it with other teams. So, if you're in engineering, maybe you're close to product or you're close to design. If you're in sales, maybe you're close to customer success and so on. And having those engagement or having those, maybe coffee dates and things like that, those are the things that really helps.
So for the leader, we'll kind of take like the first step here and then we'll go into a different topic. But for like that first step where, again, leader said, okay, I want to improve the culture here just within my team. Yeah. You feel like if there's something specific that they can focus on, like the easiest first step, like maybe doing the team engagements, like doing the team fun and the games or something, or maybe going async. Again, the meetings from now on, team meetings and one-on-ones, let's say the work portion are going to be async. Like, what do you think would be like maybe a first good step? Or do you think there could be multiple things that are easy enough to do? Because they probably can't get like a whole IRL. They may not be able to get approval to get a budget just to get their team together, or to be able to hire globally where maybe a company is hiring within the specific region. But there are probably certain smaller things that a leader can do within their specific team. What do you think would be maybe the easy wins
to have? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's definitely two things. There's like one on like a personal level. So like you do definitely have one-on-ones. If you're not having them, you can like have asynchronous for work as you're doing. I think that's like super cool. I know there are like lots of tools like Clap and Loom and, that can help you do it. But I think there should be something synchronous. Like you can't have an asynchronous conversation and have this human element to it. Like, I mean, it's really hard. So you should have like those moments that are personal with your team. As a manager, you should have at least 30 minutes once every couple of weeks where you can talk and see how everything is going. So I think that's the first one. And then having something with your team as well, like as a group. Maybe it's just a stand up for the week and it's like, we're working on that. This was the win. This was the problem. We're working on it, and then you go. I think if you can like couple that with some form of engagement, I think it's like much easier. There's a lot of, free things that you can do, but you can also like ask someone to say like, talk to us about like a hobby. And like every couple of weeks, like someone say like, I don't know, I'm fascinated by wine or by, soccer or whatever. And I want to talk to you guys about it and like have questions. I think one of the main things is like when you're doing, remote, like you have to be super intentional, as we said, but you have to say, okay, we're going to go around the Zoom or the Hangout or, whatever tool you're using, and everybody's going to give their opinion. What do they like? What they didn't like? And so everybody speaks and everybody gets engaged.
Yeah, that point is absolutely so crucial that I've seen this mistake made so many times. And it's kind of, I guess I'll pull this question out now. It's like, how do you engage those introverts, right? You have people who are naturally like me, who are very extroverted, and we'll jump on the screen and we'll talk like the entire time. And you have people who are obviously not that way. And I love that what you had mentioned. It's something that I try to be very specific myself. But again, whether it's in like a meeting, like a stand-up meeting, or whether it's in one of these Jurnee fun events within, let's say, or a free thing that you do within your game, how do you feel a leader can very much ensure that their introverts are engaged as well?
Yes, I think that's really one of the hardest parts, because you want them to be engaged, but you don't want to force it on them because like you have to be respectful. I think that's a good way, like during one-on-ones, to ask about what type of engagement they're comfortable. But what we've also learned is that introverts are also the ones that, want it the most, because they're wanting to have that engagement and not being able to participate as easily, for example, like extroverts, but it's as important for them. Yeah. So finding a way for it to be more within what they like is really interesting. Some of them that we've like spoken with, I've seen some introverts that we've spoken with have told us that they liked a lot games or engagement that are over multiple days. So this is something that they can get used to. Like it can be like a riddle or a quiz or whatever, and you're like, okay, you have 3 days to work on it. And so they like, because like they're getting intense, they're asking, people like, oh, have you found like that question? I'm working on this. And so it's like a smoother type of engagement. And then you can like at the end have like a meeting and say, okay, what did you find? What are your answers? Like who won? Who has the most points? And I think that's a way smoother type of engagement. That's just like one of the ideas that you can use.
No, that's very interesting. I haven't heard that before, but yeah, as an extrovert, I guess, you're always learning new things about the other side, but it sounds very interesting about doing like a multi-day thing where it's not forced. It's not right now. You have to be engaged. You have to give me an answer, and kind of giving people time and let them take the opportunity to be engaged as they want. That's quite interesting. So maybe tell me a little bit more about how Jurnee can actually help these leaders engage their team and build better relationships.
Sure. I mean, as we said, like for us, like that was like one of the hardest things. So that's why we wanted to build a tool for it. We think that once a quarter is like really the minimum for a team engagement, where you get outside of your routine and, think about the relationship that you have and so on. And the hardest part for us was like we knew we had to do it. I mean, most companies have budget for it because they know and they understand at a very high level that you need it, but It's just the managers are left to it. And it's not because like you're a good manager that you know how to organize a social event. Like those are two different skills that have nothing to do with one of the other. And I myself, like I don't like to organize those things. And I've made it my company to try to help people do it because I feel the pain so deeply. And I was like, I'm running, a department of 40 people on 2 countries and I need to organize a karaoke. Like this is ridiculous. Like why should I be doing that? And I think that's true. I don't think people like should be spending time on, finding different venues, getting quotes, understanding the payment process, getting that over to finance, making sure that everybody's coming, having to like understand and go back with all the people, like who's coming, who's not coming. Do you have the right info on like where you need to be? And I was like, this is a full-time job. Like people don't have the time to do that.
Sure.
But I understood like how important it was for the team to have it. And I was like, we have tools for everything. We have like amazing CRMs, like we have like amazing optimization and automation, like on our everyday tool, but we're not applying that to human engagement, which is probably one of the most precious resource that the organization have. And we wanted it to make it more modern. So teams are international, they're hybrid. And, you want to do things in the office, you want to do things remote, you want to do things in real life, virtual. Like you don't want to go through like 5 different platforms to do it. You want to have like one platform. It caters to all your need. It's, compliant with your organization. It's compliant with your internal processes in the very same way that, for example, Travel Perk has done it for business travel in an amazing way. We wanted to offer that to companies. And I think like that's the real value is like, how do you make those real hard engagement much smoother? How do you engage your team and say like, okay, go have a poll. What do you want to do? Are you going to come? What did you think about the activity? What would you like to do next? And we've seen people, which was like really great. Like they've done like, for example, like virtual terrariums and they've been speaking about it for months afterwards. They're like, oh, how's your terrarium? And they have it in their background. And that's what you want is like, how do you create those bonds in a more seamless way without all the hassle that's associated to it?
Yeah. So there's a question that I have like 3 questions now that came out of that. Where should I start?
Sure.
Maybe I'll start with the first one. As you mentioned, obviously, it could be a hybrid model. Some people in the office, some people here, some are there. How does a leader organize an event? Or what's the best way for a hybrid? I mean, you have a company, let's say a handful of employees in an office, or maybe some mixed co-working spaces, people not. Like, is there a right format? I know I've discussed this in a couple of podcasts. This is something that I think about a lot. Like, is there a right way? Is there a single way that you engage a team that's mixed all over the place?
I think it's really a hard question. It really depends like where your team is. I mean, like if you have a couple people like, I don't know, in Tel Aviv and in Paris, and then you have like 10, I don't know, in Sydney, I think that would be hard. Or I don't know if it would be like the best use of resources to get like everybody in, real life all the time. So I think it depends like where you're scattered geographically. I think it depends also like on your team demographic. Like, do you have like people that you need to care for? Like, are you free in your movements? I think like it's super important to be inclusive in that type of things. But I think the team should also like tell, what they want. And I think that's super important. If they say, like, we would much rather do something virtual, then, like, fine. Like, there are, like, so many things that you can do. Some people will say, like, we should at least once a year find a way to meet in person. And I think that's, like, super interesting. And, like, people, like, they have told us, like, we're like, we don't want to force you to, like, come to a city. And they were like, no, please force us. Like, we want to. We can take, like, a few days a year to come. And it's really important for us to, like, have that. So I think it's really about, there's no one size fits all. It's really about like, what do you feel makes sense? And we've seen customers do that amazingly, like Dailymotion and Urkel, like, they were having like breakfast in the office because it was like St. Patrick's Day, or, all those activities. And they sent boxes to the people like remotely with care packages. And so they felt that they could share pictures and they felt engaged with the company in a very different way. So I think those like hybrid events also can work. But again, it's a lot about experimenting and understanding what your team wants.
Yep. So maybe I'm going to push on that point. I think what you said at the end of, depending on what the event is for hybrid, because I think hybrid is extremely difficult to pull off the right way, because there's obviously night and day difference between the engagement in being physically together and not being physically together. I think like the case you said where it's St. Patrick's Day and everyone's doing lunch. So it's something like that. Okay, we have people in the office eating lunch, people at home doing lunch. Okay, I think that perfectly makes sense. But a lot of these cases, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, of the happy hours, and this was always like this was the use case that I always brought up against hybrid work, of the idea of you sitting all alone in your dark apartment by yourself, watching like 30 people in your office at a happy hour in the kitchen, having fun and laughing, and you're sitting there all alone at home. I'm like, that's just absolutely the worst, and it's just impossible to engage those. And so whether it is, do you do everything virtual? And I still see companies make this mistake that on like all hands or what have you, you'll have everyone in their Zoom boxes, but the people in the office, they'll all be in the same conference room. And I keep hammering people like that just can't be. Like everyone has to be equal. Everyone has to have the same real estate. Like you can't have a group of 5, 6 people all together in a room that are hanging out together on one single camera versus everybody else. I guess I'm not much of a believer in hybrid, but so maybe 2 last questions I have for you. It's the first, and I think you've hit on both of them. And this one I started off the conversation at the beginning. How can teams that are using Jurnee replicate those interpersonal interactions? Again, that if you were together in the office, throwing dough at each other or, so forth. So when you're virtual and you're doing those virtual specific events, how can Jurnee help create those interactions between the people wherever they are in the world on a video call?
Sure. I think there's lots of different ways. I think it's just, it also just doesn't start during the event. It starts before, when you're choosing what you want to do and how do you engage, and it starts after, like what did you, it doesn't start, it continues after. And I think it's like a continuous process overall. And I think that's one of the main things that like people like need to get into their routine to make it super seamless. Like people like always need to have something to look forward to. And the human component is one of the most important component at work. So having, what do you want to do? Voting, talking between people, like who wants to take the lead? All of that things, like, it can take a lot of time, but it's really important and it helps people work together. And that can have a huge impact on other projects. So I think that's the first one. I think during the engagement, it has to be active. I really believe that people like should be doing something. You cannot just be like relaxing and having a happy hour. It's not the same. It's kind of like, it was one of the founder of Evernote that said that. It's like you're trying to replicate what's happening in real life virtually, and it does not happen. It's kind of like if you're pointing a camera to theater, like it's going to feel boring because that's not how it should be. It should be different. And cinema is completely different. It's another art. And I think that you need to have that as well in your engagement. So for us, and like what we try to show is like you have active engagement. So if you want to have everybody on the same Zoom call, like then do something. Is it a cocktail class? Is it a terrarium? Do you want to learn like to cook something or bake, or do you want to taste something, or give us your opinion? I think that's like really the main first thing, like go for something active. And then I think like if you're having big teams, you should mix that with like smaller engagement between teams. So like you can have like escape games where like you're in teams of like 3 to 5 and actually you're doing something together. You're trying to solve a mystery. You have a competition with the other teams, and you can actually do that at a big company level. Like we've had like companies of hundreds of people like do escape games and like super into it because like they want to win and they want to, be heard and be known. And that's really cool. So I think having a mix of like those types of engagements where like you have to interact in a way that like you feel comfortable with really makes a difference. And I think that's why it's hard, like not to go through tools that are not like similar to us, is that having that engagement all on your own, and like it's possible, but it's just like the step is so high.
Yeah. So the last question I have is kind of tailing off that. So let's say that you have an event which is less interactive. Maybe it's like learn how to play chess, or it's maybe again, even I would say like a wine tasting where it's really, okay, you're sitting at home and maybe smelling wine and twirling wine and things like that, or it could be creating something physical. How can teams add some interaction? So it may not be necessarily in the call, but like, how do you take the event that you did and maybe afterwards build on interaction and engagement from that event that's now kind of, again, was just like a chess match or something like that?
Sure. I think there are things that you can do even during the event. And I think like certain hosts are like really amazing in doing this, is saying like just like every 5 or 10 minutes, okay, what did you like? What did you think? Do you have a question? If you had to do something, what would you do? And I feel like this really helps people to like get engaged in having those spaces. And again, like you have to be intentional. So if you're not asking the question and you're not saying like, okay, who wants to speak and say, something, it's really hard. I think like tools have integrated that really well, whether it's Zoom or things like that. Like you can have polls, you can have like a chat where people like are interacting at the same time. Like the chat boxes of virtual events are usually packed, and this is like a very good sign that the event is going well, because you can have like those two different things. But I think there's a lot of things that can happen outside. Like people share pictures of like what they have done, or receiving packages, or they're saying like, oh, like we're having the bottle of the wine that we tested because we liked it a lot. And so actually, because something that's part of the culture and that people like to do.
Yeah, I love that point about the pictures. And I think that's something that I had learned is a great opportunity, where maybe you create something physical and maybe you do a contest afterwards. Okay, everyone submit a photo, and then you do a contest between the company and everybody has a chance to vote. So you add that, again, You're sitting and maybe making an origami, whatever. And then, okay, it's maybe not so interactive during the actual event, but then be able to have those interactions of, okay, let's do a poll. Let's say the best created one, the worst created one, the most creative, and like be able to kind of have that fun and interaction off of like that opportunity is a great way to add interaction into events, even that may not have so much interaction during the event.
Yeah, pictures work a lot.
Yeah.
People really love that.
Yeah. Any questions, thoughts for me before we wrap up?
Sure. I mean, I think like more on like having like seen so many people like come, on your podcast, like what do you feel are maybe like the number one or number two, like big things that like you would give as pieces of advice for those managers trying to engage their team?
Yep. I think the number one thing is the single word that has come up more often than anything else across however many 30, 40 something episodes is intentional. Right? Intentionality is king, as you've spoken about very, very well. And it's like things aren't going to happen on their own. You can't just go to lunch, sit together in a kitchen having lunch. So everything, whether it's the engagement, whether it's like the check-ins, whether it's the one-on-ones, whether it's onboarding, mentoring, whatever, it has to be intentional. And it has to be understood that now that you're in a remote environment, it doesn't work the same way it did when you're in an office. So now you need to recreate that experience. So again, when everyone in the office could get up and go to coffee together, you can't do that. So you understand, hey, those little coffee breaks were extremely important and valuable to me, valuable to the team. How do we recreate that? And how do you bring in a tool? How do you bring in a process and be very intentional? Let's say, okay, once a day for 10 minutes, we're going to do a group coffee thing, or we're going to pair people up together, or use my side project, to plug it in here, to use kind of like that opportunity for a coffee break. Or on the one-on-one meetings, okay, how do you intentionally get that person to give feedback, or how do you do this thing? So I think that's the number one thing. Number two, I'd probably say I think creating that environment of transparency and feedback, where especially good leaders, like we're always trying to improve and making it to be comfortable for everyone to share. So I think it's, as a leader, you need to lead from a front. And whether that's vacation, right? One of the big questions around startups is unlimited vacation. Is it good? Is it bad? It's good because everyone knows that they have the opportunity to take the time off they need. Period, stop. Most people don't take the time off. So you really need like the leader to say, I'm taking this continuous week off or 2 weeks off. I'm deleting Slack. You can't get a hold of me. If you need to get a hold of somebody, go to this one. Maybe creating a document that says, here's how to do my job. In this case, go here. In this case, look there. And being very intentional. Same thing with mental health. I've tried to share, like, here's the struggles that I've been going on. And here's like, I've been having a tough day with like my kids, or I didn't sleep. And I think when you're very upfront and you as a leader, transparent, you create that environment. that makes everyone else comfortable to say, okay, now I'm having a tough day, or, my baby was up all last night. I'm really tired and I don't know how productive I'm going to be. Maybe I could start later in the day. So I think that would be like the second thing, is really creating that environment of transparency. And then when you get that feedback, doing something with it. I think that's the most important part of feedback, is what do you actually do with it, and being transparent with that. It's not, hey, Scott, maybe the example that I used before, hey, Scott, I think maybe we might sometimes maybe too async. I don't think we're spending enough time together. It's not like, okay, I heard you, we'll change it. Okay, here's the action plan. And I'm going to put a message in the team channel, gather ideas together, and then we're going to implement one of them. And I think those are the two biggest things. I think that any person who's now leading a team remotely, who may still be struggling, it's be very intentional and be very forceful in a nice way of creating an environment of transparency and being honest and leading from the front. And when you get that feedback, making sure that action is taken on it and people know what that action and what the timelines and things are. That's a great question.
Awesome. And maybe a fun one, like, what's the worst piece of advice that you've heard that, people have given to remote leaders?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'd say maybe something, I don't know if advice that's given, I think it's just probably worst practices. I think the biggest one is trust, right? The single foundation of remote work is trust, right? You have to have trust in your employer, and everything else comes after that. 4-day work weeks, no schedules, async, but when companies are trying to, okay, I need a check-in, give me a morning check-in, give me an afternoon check-in, what are you doing here? What are you doing there? That's just the worst. And I could understand why people were doing it, because in the office, you saw somebody doing this all day long, right? They were on YouTube or Facebook all day long doing this, but again, it was perceived they were doing something. And now when you couldn't have that perceived this, they kind of replicated that, or they replaced that with, okay, let's have a morning Zoom and an evening Zoom and a check-in here and a pulse survey there to let me know that you're doing work. It's like, no, make it very clear what they need to do and when they need to do it by, and let them run with it. If they do what they need to do, why they do it, fantastic, done. If they don't do it, okay, then there's the opportunity to kind of dig in. That, and I think anything around hybrid, very much against it, outside of the idea of hybrid being where you certainly replace the central headquarters for maybe more micro spaces, and it becomes a benefit, like unlimited vacation. There's a space or a bunch of spaces or a tool. Use it if you want to use it, how you want to use it, why you want to use it, because you want to use it. And if you don't want to use it, that's great too. Versus, okay, everyone's got to come back, or 3 days a week or 2 days a week. I think those are obviously the worst, and we can clearly see that they're not obviously working. So it's funny. In every one of these episodes, I always hope there's going to be debate, right? So make it juicy, make the episode real. But every one of us who's been doing this for a while, every one of us is all in the same lane. We're all on the same page. I apologize for the drilling noise behind. Everyone's literally on the same page. So as much as I try, even the last episode with the head of remote, at the beginning, the guy was like, I think we're going to have some conflict here. But at the end, we were perfectly in sync of exactly what, how, and why you're doing these things in a remote environment. But so for any listeners who are listening and are interested in getting a hold of you, learning more about you and Jurnee, what's the best way to, all the details about learning a little bit more?
Well, directly on LinkedIn, I think that's the easiest way. I think we're pretty active there. So in my inbox, I try to answer everyone as much as possible. And otherwise, our website, we have chat, we're super accessible. So please come say hi.
Awesome. So we'll definitely put all those links in the show notes. And Tania, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat today and to learn more about how you've been leading remote teams even before the pandemic and with previous companies as well, and the fantastic tool that you're building to help other remote leaders and remote companies build engagement and build fun. Because my last thing, it's that's the big thing, is people think, okay, IRL, let's get the team together once a year. That's going to do it. But what do you do in between then, right? Just the time in between those is probably more important, or as important as the time that you get in real life. So thank you so much for building that. Thank you so much for joining. And until the next episode, everybody, have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks again, everybody, for tuning into today's episode of Leading from Afar. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can learn more on our website, leadingfromafar.com, and subscribe to the podcast in your favorite app. This podcast is all about you, the remote leaders. We'd love to hear from you with your feedback or ideas for future topics and remote leaders we should be speaking with.